Hi, welcome back to my channel. I basically wanted to do a video on how spirituality has been something that I've been very into over the last few years. Please excuse me if I ever hesitate or look behind me or anything. I have not filmed in public ever before, apart from, actually I have a couple of times, but just if I get some weird looks I might be slightly distracted, but I'm going to try not to be. I watched a video today on a past psychic who basically was talking about how she found God and basically moved away from that sort of new age stuff, and it kind of like brought to focus a couple of things within myself that need to be truths that I kind of hadn't really acknowledged or kind of was living in falsehood about, but also it kind of made me see how there's a quote in the Bible saying how God uses all evil for good, and that is helpful because some of the stuff that I've kind of experienced or believed in spiritually, which may not be quite biblical, or it could be biblical, but there's so many myths around things like Christianity. Obviously the Bible is completely, it never avoids, not at all, but sometimes because of societal constructs and the way we on a human level understand life, and we know that God works on a level beyond our understanding, so there can be certain sort of like preconceived ideas that can be difficult and challenging to sort of work around, so when you do get sort of caught up and brought to sort of the end, if you know what I mean, it's sort of a really bad sort of like space in like life, and you feel like not the end of life, I mean sort of like an end of a, like you kind of, they talk about renewal, if you like. Sometimes maybe something really bad can happen, it can sort of like just destroy parts of you that are then renewed in a different way, if that makes sense. So I was watching a video, this girl was talking about how she was looking for deeper meaning, and that was what drove her really to have a interest in spirituality and an interest in angels and things that was like beyond the realms of the or just in the realms of like the mystical and things like that. Because it also says in the Bible that God walks with us in the most like in detailed times, like he knows the hairs on our head, and he like knows like everything about us, every tiny little detail. If he can count the hairs on our head, obviously he knows like the big things that are going on that are kind of in our comprehension. He sees everything, but the thing is, things like spirituality, certain stuff, I think everything, as I said, works together for good. She was talking about how certain stuff can be cool and trendy and stuff, but not to get like too carried away with it. In my experience, I've definitely been in that place. So she was talking about this sort of like angel or whatever called Metatron, and that she kind of felt compelled to do these like what's the word? Like where you do shapes, like geonomical, something like that. I can't remember. These type of shapes, she kept drawing them compulsively because she had these like imagination ideas of them, and she'd just keep drawing them. But she said it was kind of, she felt like it was sort of like a sort of demonic idea to get her drawn away from God in the end, and she didn't think it was something that was very, she was at this time like meditating on this like angel called like Metatron or whatever. The psychic then came in and said she thought that because she, like obviously God works way beyond the level of these like perceived like angels and stuff, so they can't be biblical for that reason or whatever. And she said during this time it had an impact on her personal life as well. And I think for things I've experienced, I haven't ever like sort of seen a drawing and then just start drawing it, but I think for things, I think sometimes you can find that your traits, for example, I have like autistic traits and stuff, for example, so if this person had autistic traits or, you know, a level of like perfectionism or whatever, that could be a tactic used to then distract by drawing photos and stuff, drawing pictures and stuff to, you know. But then art is an amazing like thing, and some people obviously are so talented in art, and you think that's not then necessarily considered demonic. So this is like the kind of like discussion topic I'm kind of having about it. And I'm definitely a believer of like wounds are there for a reason, like, and I think if I hadn't have had certain situations happen to me that kind of upset me or made me sad for whatever reason, or you know, things wouldn't have happened to then grow in that area. And I definitely think as well, kind of along this vein of sort of like being deceived, if you could be deceived in certain areas, I think sometimes people, there's definitely a lot of different ways that you can look at certain stuff. I've definitely heard people that have had ADHD? No, PTSD symptoms. I saw this thing on Dr. Phil or something like that, where someone had exorcisms that really helped with her PTSD symptoms, but it was something that came back later on, so that's why, like, obviously the mental health system and things are there to kind of like impact your life beyond just the PTSD symptoms, just beyond like the spiritual side of it, in my opinion. Obviously I'm not a doctor or anything like that, but that's obviously the logic behind it that I would decode from that. But sorry, please bear with me, my writing is so messy. I kind of had this epiphany moment this morning and I wrote it all down. So yeah, I literally can't even remember what I was saying then. Oh yeah, so this idea of lack of willpower. So, for example, one could argue having things like an eating disorder could be something that is, you know, some sort of like demonic influence kind of compelling you to do something like that. Obviously, from a mental health perspective, there would be logically a lot of maybe reasons that could go around that, which I'm not going to discuss now, because I'm not going to trigger anyone or anything like that. But I definitely think you could argue that certain things in life could not be due to a lack of like willpower. In life, say if you can't, for example, if you've got depression, you could argue would be some sort of like demonic influence. I wouldn't say, obviously people know that like depression and stuff isn't due to a lack of willpower, but I think even from a spiritual sense you could argue that's not a lack of willpower, because you are sort of like being deceived in that way. But as I said, I definitely think all things happen for a reason. Like I definitely know there's been times in my life where I've been very sort of like productive, overly productive to an extent, and then I think in times where I've not been productive, for example during lockdown, that has really kind of evened out that balance for me, because I think the swing pendulum will come back anyway, regardless of what you do really. But sorry. Oh yeah, and I kind of looked at this idea of like blasphemy in terms of like perceiving certain like angels in this sort of like spiritual some holistic places, like this thing called Metatron and stuff. The psychic said that was blasphemy, and I kind of looked at blasphemy as a level of human beings and how we might have that, because they say we're made in the image of God, how humans would then potentially how we might be able to understand blasphemy as human beings. And for that I was kind of like and how God might want to sort of discipline us as humans, as his children, for example. So I just thought, like, if someone is acting sort of badly, you might sort of like leave it, and then you might bring something to, you know, harm them, or, you know, have a negative reaction in some way. I kind of can see that might be how God works. And it says people that do go to like psychics and stuff, they will be removed from their people. It's actually a quote, like, people that turn to psychics and stuff will be removed from their people. But honestly, and I'm being raw and honest here, which is that I feel like I've been one of those people which has always been very overwhelmed in the school system. I've always been very overwhelmed by people, and I've always wanted that escape and never really been able to get it, because I have had to be in an institution school, not an institution school, but like a school that was legal for me to be there throughout the vast majority of my life. So having that kind of almost escape, if you like, and I do think I've kind of maybe detached. I've definitely had issues throughout my life which has kind of given me a bit of an escape, and that's not, if you look from a mental health perspective, not healthy. I've definitely been in places where I've done unhealthy escape mechanisms, which is a healthy mechanism within the psyche, but not healthy ways of going about it, if that makes sense. Yeah, I don't really know what I've written there, so I really should have written this more carefully, but if you can see, it's so scribbly and I'm really struggling to read it. She was talking about also how some, like, ideas of meditating under certain things, which might not be necessarily good necessarily to meditate under for long periods of time or whatever, can put you in a sort of trance and then make you vulnerable to any sort of deception that might surround you or whatever. But meditating on the word of God is always going to be good for that reason. Back to how this has affected me in my personal life. For example, I genuinely believe I was influenced by religious narcissists. I was definitely brought up within Catholicism and Christianity, which I've mentioned before on my channel I don't really follow because it was so shoved down my throat as a child that I kind of had to move away from it and make my own decision to what I wanted to follow. And now I definitely believe in God and follow God in my own way, but I'm not sort of part of a human church. I watch church online and stuff like that. I'm very careful about what groups of people I surround myself with that also follow God, because I think there's this sort of mixed sort of community sense within certain churches, which can be unhealthy if you ask me. Certain like toxic and stuff, certain stuff can go on. There's just mixed boundaries around people. I don't think it's very clear all the time. Not to say having friends that are, I went to a Christian group once and that was okay, I might get back, you never know. So yeah, it taught me how to sort of like step away from religious narcissists, because I kind of did step away from religion a bit and sort of like follow that more spirituality sense. I'm not like saying like spirituality is not good to explore. Spirituality is a part of our innate human being way of how we are inbuilt within it. I'm just talking about people that have talked about sort of things that have affected them in whatever way. So and also it's taught me how to sort of like not be pushed towards things others say, because I think things like spirituality, you are very like aware of your own standards and boundaries and certain stuff, and it's really kind of even through being on my own and sort of like exploring that within myself, I definitely think it's been a place where I've just sort of been like, I don't need to explain this to other people. Obviously I'm choosing to explain it here, but things like that, it's kind of like a click reaction onto something. You don't have to be like, oh well, I'm choosing to ignore you or never talk to you again because of da da da. If someone like has really hurt you to the point where you don't want to talk to them again, you don't have to necessarily I'm not talking about friends and family here, I'm talking about someone that's just like random that was in your life. You don't have to explain that to them. You can just be like, okay, like, and you can do that within yourself. And it's also taught me I can be alone and say no with no excuses, so that's also something that's also helpful. Yeah. Oh, this is so hard to read. But because of the idea of things like angels and stuff being blasphemy, from what she said, she just reiterated the idea that like Jesus died for us because of the sins that we like committed, aka blasphemy and things like that, and like obviously stuff like that. So that's always a nice little strand to put in there for this sort of video. Yeah, and yeah, so I've actually definitely found through sort of allowing myself to, I think part of stuff that comes from spirituality is that it's just different means of understanding. They talk about drugs in this way, sometimes hallucinogenics and things like that. Sometimes when you're not really aware and conscious and choosing to think about certain things, you kind of go into areas, and I do think you have to be careful about this, especially, I think this is how mental illness can evolve if you have some issues that you're not really tackling in the right way, which is where mental health services and things like that can sort of actually be a great tool to do this, rather than just jumping into things like hallucinogenics. I definitely think you should be in the right headspace to handle stuff like that. I don't think I would ever personally do hallucinogenics, but just to put that out there. But what was I going to say? Yeah, oh, I can't remember what I was going to say now. But basically, this girl, when I was watching this video, was talking about how her heart, even though she was looking to sort of be she said she knew that she was looking for a deeper meaning and to be understood, and not doing like necessarily just what society or other people told her to do, and sort of like just finding stuff that was within herself. That is looking for truth. That is like an innate need and an innate sort of like valid, great thing to do. Like your heart and is seeking like passion and truth. And she just said that she now looks for that in the Bible rather than things that are outside of the Bible that might be sort of counterintuitive to certain stuff. But I also want to just bring in, like, I've done videos on levels of consciousness before. I definitely think we all have different levels of consciousness that affect the way we operate and how we understand things, and that doesn't make one person wrong, it doesn't make another person right. Obviously I think lockdown made that apparent to me, but it doesn't mean you need to like accept everyone into your life or anything. Like, you definitely got to like prioritize yourself and like the group of people that you have, rather than like try and like gather everyone. Like, even like Jesus had a group of friends, his like disciples, or he didn't sort of like try and befriend every single person, even though he was kind to so many people. Not that, you know, but he didn't try and like grab everyone into his inner circle. Not saying that people have like lots of friends about, but you know what I mean. And she was like talking about how she like dares people to like read the Bible and try and see if because you can shatter truths that you think you have within yourself, even if they're negative. Like, you can have negative truths or beliefs about things that might not even be related to the Bible. They might not be related to like any sort of spiritual situation, but you can still shatter truths that are related to those things, literally just by either looking at scripture or just challenging things within yourself. I've noticed that if something isn't true, it will like shatter by default. So another thing that I could think about from human beings in terms of blasphemy is people who act like how they aren't, because blasphemy by definition is kind of taking the piss and like mocking like God and Jesus and stuff, and people that act like who they aren't, or they like poke fun, or they sort of like think it's easier to so that's kind of the idea of blasphemy. I think if someone was to poke fun at you and like make fun of like and sort of like, people think of blasphemy and they think, oh, walking around literally like Jesus and pretending you are him. Like, blasphemy is just like taking the piss. So I think as human beings you can kind of understand sins. I probably might want to go into a different video about that. That's probably something quite interesting, how like sins can relate to us as we are made sort of in the image of God, and how God can react. But I definitely think it's easier to forgive someone if they're like deceived into blasphemy, for example, like acknowledging like an angel, which might not be necessarily biblical or whatever, because it does say in the Bible as well, obviously, test the spirit before you sort of like accept it, if you like. Not that you should like accept spirits, what I mean is like challenge a thought, but also it does say in the Bible, test the spirit before you sort of like acknowledge. I'm not really going to talk about, you know, I don't think you should accept spirits, but there we go. So yeah, just to kind of like sum up then, because I can't read any more of my words, but I definitely think that all evil can work together for good, and things come through God's hands at the end of the day. Like, it says in the Bible, he doesn't give us things that we can't handle, and you might argue, oh well, you know, really horrible things happen. Like, I've had horrible things happen. I'm sure so many people and everyone has had horrible things happen, or will have horrible things happen in their lives, don't get me wrong, but I definitely would say that yeah, I'm gonna have to go because I think I'm sat somewhere where I'm not supposed to be. So thanks for listening.